All right, so if you've heard of this, it's pretty wild.
Here's what?
This statistic, it really makes you think. From this University of Chicago and United YMCA Schools survey,
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
they found that, okay, get this, after health, the thing adults are most interested in is other people.
Oh, wow, really?
I know, right? Like understanding them, getting along, making them like you, even influencing how they think. It's like this huge, almost universal drive to connect with each other. But here's the catch. The same survey also revealed this really surprising lack of practical resources, like readily available stuff on how to actually do that well.
That's so interesting. It's like this fundamental human need, but it's almost left to chance. You'd think there'd be more intentional guidance out there.
Right. And that is precisely where our deep dive today takes us. We're diving into a book that stepped into that very gap, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Oh, that's a classic.
Yeah, and it's not just some old book. I mean, this thing, it started with a modest little print run back in 1937, and then bam, exploded into this international phenomenon. It's become one of the best-selling books ever, resonating with generation after generation. It really is fascinating how it just captured something timeless.
It makes you wonder what Carnegie tapped into that made it so enduring. I mean, it wasn't just a product of its time. It really hit on something fundamental about human nature. And you can't deny the title itself has become so iconic. It's instantly recognizable, quoted, even parodied, a real cultural marker.
Absolutely. So for you, our listener, think of this deep dive as like a shortcut to understanding the core principles behind human interaction, those kind of make or break dynamics.
Mhm.
And whether you're prepping for a huge meeting, navigating those complex team dynamics, or just genuinely curious about how to communicate more effectively, the insights we're going to unpack are really practical. We're not talking abstract theory here. Carnegie grounded his work in years of research and the real-life experiences of tons of people.
So it's not just armchair philosophy. He actually went out and gathered evidence to support his ideas.
Precisely. And it gets even more interesting. These principles weren't just, him sitting in a room and coming up with stuff. They came from this really extensive 2-year survey. Cost a whopping $25,000 back then, huge sum. And they interviewed basically every adult in Meriden, Connecticut.
Wow, they really went all out. That's a really comprehensive approach, interviewing an entire town to understand people's concerns and what they wanted to learn.
Right. It really does show that commitment to truly getting a grasp of human nature, like starting at ground level.
That's fascinating. So interviewing an entire town, what exactly did they ask these people?
They dove deep into people's interests, their ambitions, their challenges, and most importantly, what they felt they were lacking. The subjects they were hungry to learn more about.
And I'm assuming that's where this whole fascination with understanding people really surfaced, right? Like they had the data to back it up.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just an assumption, it was evident. But Carnegie didn't stop there. He went a step further and personally tracked down and interviewed an incredible range of successful people. We're talking heavy hitters like Marconi, Edison, even Franklin D. Roosevelt and Clark Gable.
What a diverse mix. You've got scientists, politicians, even a Hollywood star. What was he looking for in such different personalities?
You wanted to understand their techniques, the specific ways they interacted with others, their secrets to success in human relations. And get this. He refined these ideas over 15 years, running his popular Carnegie Institute courses in New York. It's amazing. It started as a simple set of guidelines, almost like a cheat sheet on a postcard, and grew organically into a full-fledged book shaped by real-world application and feedback from thousands.
So a constant evolution of ideas, going from basic observations to testing in a real classroom environment, and then further shaping based on feedback from such a wide range of people. That makes it so much more than just a book. It's almost like a living, breathing set of principles constantly tested and validated.
Right. It's like a living document of human interaction. So that's exactly the aim of this deep dive today, equipping you, our listener, with these actionable insights from the book. We want you to be able to navigate your relationships, avoid those common pitfalls, and ultimately, achieve what you set out to do by understanding people better.
It's about giving people the tools to build more successful relationships and achieve their goals, whatever those may be.
Exactly. So, ready to dive into the first principle that Carnegie highlights?
Absolutely. Let's hear it.
Okay, so principle number 1 is, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Sounds simple, right?
Yeah, on the surface, but I'm sure there's more to it. There's always more to it with human behavior.
Exactly. And Carnegie really digs into the why behind this.
Hmm.
He starts with a pretty dramatic story. Two Gun Curly, this notorious gangster. Picture this. He's surrounded by like 150 police officers.
Mhm.
And guess what? This guy, a hardened criminal, refuses to accept any blame for his actions. He actually saw himself as the victim, defending himself.
Oh, wow. That level of denial is incredible. Even when facing overwhelming evidence, some people just can't or won't acknowledge their own faults. It's a fascinating psychological defense mechanism, isn't it? It's like the ego protecting itself at all costs.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't just Crayley. Carnegie also talks about Al Capone, public enemy number one. And get this, he genuinely believed he was providing people with lighter pleasures, felt totally persecuted, almost surreal. And then there's John Wanamaker, the department store magnate. He admitted that he learned, after like 3 decades, that scolding people was pointless. He realized that he himself struggled enough to overcome his own flaws, so why expect others to be any different?
It's so true. Criticism often triggers defensiveness. Instead of encouraging change, it can actually make people dig in their heels, even breed resentment. It's like that saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Makes you think about how we approach giving feedback, doesn't it?
Big time. And speaking of learning the hard way, Carnegie points to Abraham Lincoln. Apparently, early in his life, Lincoln was quite the critic. He would write these really sharp, even biting letters and poems, really going after people.
Oh, wow. I never knew that about Lincoln. Seems so different from his later image.
It's interesting how people evolve, right? But those early actions created this deep resentment that stuck with people for years. Shows how much damage criticism can do, even if you later become known for your compassion.
That's a powerful point. It highlights how those early negative interactions can have such lasting consequences, regardless of how much we might change and grow later in life.
And Lincoln's transformation later on is even more striking. There's this really powerful story about the Battle of Gettysburg. Lee's army was in a super vulnerable position, and Lincoln saw it as this huge chance to possibly end the Civil War right then and there.
High stakes moment. What happened?
He urgently directed General Meade to attack Lee's forces, but Meade hesitated, and Lee managed to escape.
Oh no, talk about a missed opportunity. How did Lincoln handle that?
Well, Lincoln was deeply disappointed, and he wrote this letter to Meade, expressing his frustration and distress. He wrote, "Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it."
That sounds pretty direct, almost like a reprimand.
Here's the thing, he never sent the letter. He wrote it, poured out his feelings, and then wisely chose not to send it. He realized that berating Meade wouldn't achieve anything productive.
Wow, what an incredible display of restraint. I mean, to hold back a strongly worded criticism, especially after such a major strategic misstep, really shows remarkable emotional intelligence.
Right. Lincoln understood that leadership isn't about lashing out in anger. Sometimes the best approach is to hold back, even when it feels justified.
It makes you think about all those times you might be better off hitting the delete button rather than sending that fiery email or text, even if it feels incredibly righteous in the moment.
Exactly. And to drive home the emotional impact of unnecessary criticism, Carnegie includes this really moving piece called Father Forgets by W. Livingston Larned.
I don't think I've heard of that one. What's it about?
It's this father's reflection on how often he found fault with his son. Little stuff, not wiping his face, shoes not polished. And then this wave of regret hits him, realizing that all those little criticisms kind of overshadow the love he felt for his child.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. I can see how that story would really hit home. The father's remorse is palpable, a powerful reminder that sometimes our words can do more harm than good, even when they come from a place of caring.
It's a powerful lesson for all of us. Okay, ready to move on to principle number 2.
Let's hear it.
This one delves into motivation, the real drivers of human behavior. Principle number 2 is give honest and sincere appreciation.
Okay, I like that one already. But how do you go about doing that in a way that feels genuine and impactful?
Great question. That's where Carnegie talks about the big secret to influencing others. And it's not about manipulation. It's about tapping into intrinsic motivation, making people want to do something because it aligns with their desires.
So appealing to their inner motivations rather than trying to force them to do something they don't want to do?
Exactly. He talks about Freud's ideas, the whole sex urge thing, the desire to be great. And then there's John Dewey's concept of the desire to be important.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I can see how that would play a big role in how we interact with each other, that need to feel valued and recognized.
Right, that desire to be important seems to be at the core of so much.
So, how does Carnegie illustrate this in the book? Does he have any good examples of how this works in practice?
He does. There's this simple but effective story about a nephew who wrote his Dear Uncle Andrew letter, but get this, he forgot to include the money.
Oh no, that's a big oversight. Did the uncle notice?
Of course. But here's the interesting part. The uncle still responded, saying how much he appreciated the kind note.
Wow, so he chose to focus on the positive intention rather than the missing funds. That's an interesting approach.
It really shows how even a small acknowledgement, focusing on the good, can have a positive impact. It feeds that desire for recognition. And then there's the relatable one. Every parent can relate to this. Stan Novak, trying to get his son Kim excited about kindergarten. Instead of just forcing him, Stan and his wife thought, what aspects of kindergarten would Tim actually enjoy?
A smart approach, putting themselves in the kids' shoes.
They focused on fun things like finger painting, making new friends, even started finger painting at home. Suddenly, Tim was actually looking forward to school.
That's brilliant. By focusing on what would genuinely excite the child, they were able to tap into his natural motivation and create a positive association with something he might have initially dreaded. Instead of a power struggle, it became about shared enjoyment.
And it applies to all sorts of situations. Like when Carnegie was negotiating the rent for a ballroom he used for his lectures. The hotel manager wanted to triple the rent. Instead of arguing, Carnegie cleverly framed the conversation around what the manager would gain. He pointed out that the ballroom would be free for other, more profitable events when he wasn't using it.
That's so smart. He turned a potential conflict into a win-win situation. He focused on the manager's interests, appealing to his desire for profit. It's like that famous Henry Ford quote, "If there's any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own."
Exactly. And Carnegie really contrasts this with a lot of the self-centered language you see in, say, advertising. Those our company desires
Yeah.
statements. They completely ignore what the reader might actually want or need. It's like talking to a brick wall.
It's so true. We often get so caught up in our own message that we forget to consider how it's being received on the other end.
And then he shares these contrasting examples of written communication. One is a letter from a freight terminal superintendent to a guy named Edward Vermeulen. It totally backfired because it was all about the terminal's problems and demands. On the other hand, you have Barbara Anderson's job application letter, which was incredibly successful because it focused entirely on what she could offer the banks in Phoenix, what they would gain by hiring her.
Ah, two very different approaches. The first one is all about me, while the second one focuses on the value being offered to the recipient. That's a great lesson in understanding your audience.
Totally. And then there's the life insurance salesman who consistently failed because he never bothered to understand why people would even want his policies. It always comes back to framing things in terms of what matters to the other person, creating that desire.
It reminds me of that great O&D Young quote. People who can put themselves in the place of other people, who can understand the workings of their minds, need never worry about what the future has in store for them. Understanding others is key to navigating life successfully.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to understand that focusing on the other person's wants isn't about being manipulative. It's about finding those win-win situations where both sides benefit. Like in those examples we just discussed, both sides gain something positive. It's all about fostering mutually beneficial outcomes.
It's about creating those win-win scenarios where everyone walks away feeling satisfied. Makes sense.
Right. He even shares this story about an underweight boy who wouldn't eat. Finally, his parents figured out how to motivate him. They framed eating around his desire to be big and strong, like his dad.
Aw, smart parenting. Appealing to his aspirations.
And then there's this dad, KT Dutchman, trying to get his daughter to eat breakfast food. He let her participate in making it, made her feel all grown up and responsible. Suddenly, she loved it. It wasn't about forcing her. It was about appealing to her desire for independence and involvement.
I love these simple, everyday examples. They really demonstrate how understanding motivation can make such a difference in our interactions. But honestly, how good are we at actually focusing on others?
Well, that's where Carnegie throws in a bit of a reality check. He reminds us that, by nature, people are mostly interested in themselves. He even mentions this study by the New York Telephone Company. They found that I is the most frequently used word in conversations.
Oh, wow. A bit sobering, but probably true. We are pretty self-centered creatures, aren't we?
We are. And this is where Alfred Adler's quote really hits home. He said, "It is the individual who is not interested in his fellow man who has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injury to others. It is from among such individuals that all human failures spring."
That's pretty powerful. It's a stark reminder that our inability to connect with others, to genuinely care about their well-being, can be the root of many personal and societal problems.
Right. And to illustrate the power of genuine interest, Carnegie talks about Theodore Roosevelt. He was known for remembering even the smallest details about people. Like he once went out of his way to help his valet's wife find information about a bobwhite bird she was worried about. It's those little gestures that show you genuinely care and are paying attention.
Absolutely. It's not about grand gestures. It's those small acts of kindness and consideration that really resonate.
And he even talks about how he got to meet some really busy authors simply by expressing genuine admiration for their work. And then there's that story about the bank president who was blown away when a guy named Walters asked him about his stamp collection.
Ah, the power of shared interests. It's amazing how a genuine curiosity about someone's passions can create such a strong connection.
It's like a secret weapon.
Yeah.
And then you have C.M. Naffel Jr. He was trying to sell fuel, and initially he kept criticizing chain stores, the competition. But then he totally changed his approach. He started asking those same chain stores for their help in a debate. Suddenly, he was selling.
What a brilliant strategy. Instead of alienating them, he engaged them, made them feel like experts, and got them on his side.
Right. And to round off this principle, Carnegie tells this really moving story about Thanksgiving. There was this lonely patient in a hospital, and one of the student nurses went above and beyond, showing genuine kindness and care. It made all the difference for that patient.
That's a beautiful example of how a little bit of human connection can go such a long way, especially for people who are feeling isolated or vulnerable.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness are the most meaningful. So principle number 2 is all about recognizing the importance of others, making them feel valued and appreciated. Okay, ready for principle number 3.
Hit me with it.
This one's about something we all have, something very personal. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language.
Our names, huh? It's true they hold a special significance for each of us.
They do, and Carnegie goes into how powerful using someone's name can be. But he kicks it off by talking about the power of a genuine smile.
Ah, the good old smile. A universal language, right?
It is. He even quotes Professor James V. McConnell, who said that a smile is incredibly effective in things like management, teaching, and sales.
Makes sense. A genuine smile can convey so much warmth, approachability, sincerity. It disarms people and makes them more receptive to what you have to say.
Right. And there's this great story about a department store manager. He said he'd rather hire a smiling high school dropout than a grumpy PhD. It just shows how much weight a positive attitude carries.
A smiling face can often open more doors than a stack of diplomas, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond face-to-face interactions, too. He mentions these phone power programs that emphasize how your smile can actually be heard in your voice.
Oh, that's interesting. It's true, you can definitely hear a smile in someone's tone. It makes you feel like they're genuinely happy to talk to you.
Right. It makes a huge difference. There's even this anecdote about a job applicant who picked a job offer based on the friendly tone of the phone interview.
Makes sense. A warm and welcoming tone can be the deciding factor, especially when you're trying to choose between multiple options. It shows that the company values positive interactions.
Totally. And then he brings in the chairman of a major rubber company. This guy noticed that people rarely succeed unless they enjoy their work.
Oh, that's insightful. When you're passionate about what you do, it shows and it draws people in. That passion is often contagious.
Right. And he shares the story of Bill, this businessman who was kind of a grump. But he decided to make a conscious effort to smile more. And guess what? It transformed not only his own happiness, but also his relationships with others.
That's a great example of how a simple shift in attitude can have a ripple effect, creating a more positive environment for everyone around you. It's proof that happiness can be contagious.
It really is. And there's that classic Chinese proverb, a man without a smiling face must not open a shop.
Love that. Wise words.
Right. Even centuries ago, people recognized the importance of a smile in business. And even this New York City department store had a whole philosophy on the value of a smile at Christmas, realizing how much it can lift spirits.
It makes sense, especially during the holidays when things can get pretty hectic and stressful. A genuine smile can help diffuse tension and create a more positive atmosphere. But now, what about the whole name thing? How does that tie in?
Oh, yeah, good point. So Carnegie tells this amazing story about Jim Farley, this political genius. He can remember the names of tens of thousands of people. And that skill was absolutely crucial for Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidential campaigns. Imagine the impact of someone remembering your name in a sea of faces.
Wow, talk about a superpower. That ability to make people feel seen and remembered in such a personal way must have been invaluable in politics. It builds trust and loyalty like nothing else.
It totally does. And then there's the story about Carnegie's own negotiations with Pullman, the railroad car guy. They were talking about merging their companies. And when Carnegie suggested they call it Pullman Palace Car Company, prominently featuring Pullman's name, it basically sealed the deal. Ego and recognition, even in high-stakes business.
Fascinating. Shows how deeply people, even powerful figures like Pullman, crave recognition and want to see their contributions acknowledged.
It's human nature. And there's another story about Roosevelt. This time, he remembered the name of a mechanic he'd briefly met and sent him a thank you note.
Again, those small gestures make a huge impact. It shows genuine care and consideration. It's not about the size of the gesture, it's about the thoughtfulness behind it.
Totally. And one smart politician said this: to recall a voter's name is statesmanship. To forget it is oblivion.
Uh-huh. That's spot on. Remembering names is essential for building relationships, especially in politics where personal connections are paramount.
Right. It's all about making that personal connection. Carnegie even lays out Napoleon III's tricks for remembering names. He was super intentional about it. He'd ask for repetition, spelling, look for distinctive features to associate with the name, even write names down and visualize them later.
Wow, that's a systematic approach. It shows that remembering names isn't always easy, but it's a skill you can develop with practice and effort. Napoleon III clearly saw it as a worthy investment.
He did. And there's this simple, relatable example of a guy named Ken Nottingham. He noticed that Eunice, the cafeteria worker, was always kind of grumpy. But then he started using her name, and her whole demeanor changed. She became super friendly.
It's amazing how such a small thing, just being addressed by your name, can shift an entire interaction. It creates a sense of personal connection and respect that can completely transform the dynamic.
It really is. And Carnegie sums it up perfectly. A person's name is uniquely theirs, it's darkly personal, and hearing it makes them feel recognized and special.
It's like a verbal handshake, a way of acknowledging their individual existence and importance. Simple, yet powerful.
Okay, ready to tackle principle number 4.
Bring it on! I'm ready to hear more of Carnegie's wisdom.
This one's all about shifting the focus from ourselves to others. Principle number 4 is, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm sure we could all use a little reminder about this one. It's so easy to get caught up in our own thoughts and forget to really listen.
Totally. And Carnegie flips the script on what it means to be an interesting conversationalist. It's not about being the most talkative or telling the best stories. It's about being a really attentive and engaged listener.
I like that reframing. It really challenges the conventional notion of what makes someone interesting to talk to. So how does Carnegie illustrate this concept? Does he have any good anecdotes about the power of listening?
He does. He tells this story about a dinner party he went to. It was with a renowned botanist, a real expert in his field. Carnegie barely said a word, mostly just asked questions and really listened to the botanist's explanations. And guess what? At the end of the night, the botanist told everyone that Carnegie was a most interesting conversationalist.
Huh. That's ironic but brilliant. It just goes to show how much people value being truly heard, having someone listen to them with genuine interest and without interrupting. It's a form of validation that makes them feel understood and respected.
Exactly. And he even quotes former Harvard president Charles W. Eliot, who said this: exclusive attention to the person who is speaking to you is very important. Nothing else is so flattering as that.
Exclusive attention. I love that phrase. It really emphasizes the active nature of good listening. It's not just about being physically present and quiet. It's about being fully engaged with the speaker, both mentally and emotionally. It's a skill that requires focus and effort.
Absolutely. It's a commitment. And then there's a great example of how this plays out in a business setting. A guy named Mr. Detmer had to deal with a super angry customer who refused to pay his bill. Instead of arguing, Detmer just listened patiently, let the guy vent.
Oh, I bet that was tough. Letting someone unleash their anger at you without getting defensive can be incredibly difficult.
It takes a lot of self-control, for sure. But in the end, by making the customer feel heard and understood, Detmer resolved the issue and actually strengthened the business relationship.
That's a great example of how active listening can de-escalate a situation and turn a potential conflict into a more positive outcome. It shows the power of empathy in action.
Totally. And Carnegie also tells this really inspiring story about a Western Union office boy. This young guy was super curious and had a habit of listening intently to the messages passing through his hands. He even started corresponding with some of the prominent figures whose telegrams he handled. It's amazing he essentially educated himself and opened up incredible opportunities just by actively listening and engaging with others.
That's such a great story. It shows the power of listening as a tool for learning and personal growth. By actively seeking out knowledge and insights from others, we can expand our horizons in ways we never imagined.
It's like a hidden superpower.
Yeah.
And the description of Sigmund Freud's listening style is really striking. He listened so intently, so appreciatively, that people felt truly seen and understood by him. No wonder he was such an effective
That's
therapist.
fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
That ability to make people feel deeply heard, to really grasp their inner world, must have been a key part of his success. It makes you think about the therapeutic potential of simply being a good listener.
It really does. And Carnegie quotes Dr. Nicholas Murray Butler, who had a pretty strong opinion on this topic. He said, "People who only talk about themselves are hopelessly uneducated."
Ooh, that's cutting, but also incredibly true. If we're only focused on our own little world and our own experiences, we're missing out on so much learning and growth that comes from connecting with others.
Right. So Carnegie emphasizes asking questions that people actually enjoy answering, encouraging them to talk about their accomplishments and passions. It's all about keeping the focus where people naturally want it on themselves and their interests.
It's about creating a space where they feel comfortable sharing what's important to them, where they feel heard and validated.
And he reminds us of a very real truth. People are way more interested in their own little problems than in big global issues. He uses this funny analogy. People are more concerned with their own toothache than with a famine in China. It puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
Huh, it's a bit blunt, but that's a great way to illustrate our natural tendency to prioritize our own immediate experiences. It's a good reminder to be mindful of that when interacting with others.
It is. And there are so many great examples of how this plays out in real life. Like the bakery salesman who finally won over a baker by asking about the baker's challenges, his interests, or Edward E. Harriman, who impressed R.J. Funkhauser by focusing on Funkhauser's past achievements, not by asking for a job outright.
Smart strategies. It's about building a genuine connection based on the other person's priorities and interests, which can then pave the way for achieving your own goals.
And there's this really heartwarming story about a teacher, Mr. Rolland. He saw this shy student, Chris, and recognized his potential. So he invited Chris to join the advanced class, making him feel valued and capable. It had a huge impact on Chris's confidence.
That's a wonderful example of how a simple act of recognition and encouragement can make such a difference in someone's life. It shows the power of believing in others, especially those who might doubt themselves.
It really does. So principle number 4 is all about being a good listener, encouraging others to talk about themselves, and making them feel heard and understood. Ready for principle number 5?
Absolutely. Bring it on. This is fascinating stuff.
This one flows naturally from the previous principle. Principle number 5 is talk in terms of the other person's interests. Once you've listened and gotten a sense of what someone cares about, you can tailor your communication to those interests.
Makes perfect sense. It's about making your conversations relevant and engaging for the other person, showing that you're paying attention to what matters to them.
Exactly. And Carnegie tells this amazing story about a Connecticut attorney. This guy unexpectedly inherited a Packard car from an elderly relative. And guess what? It was simply because he'd always shown a genuine interest in her memories, her personal stories, her cherished belongings. No ulterior motive, just genuine connection.
Wow, what a great example of the unexpected rewards that can come from simply being genuinely interested in others. It's not always about getting something tangible in return. Sometimes it's about those deeper human connections that enrich our lives.
So true. And then there's James Adamson, who managed to secure this huge order, $90,000 back then,
Yeah.
from the super successful George Eastman. But he didn't do it with some pushy sales pitch. He genuinely admired Eastman's office and even more so his philanthropy work, connecting with him on a deeper level.
Smart move. He tapped into what Eastman truly valued, his passions beyond just business. It shows the power of aligning your conversation with the other person's deeper interests and values.
And it even works in the workplace. Claude Murray, a manager, successfully kept a really valuable employee simply by expressing sincere appreciation for her work. It wasn't a raise or a promotion, just genuine recognition that made her feel valued.
The power of appreciation. Feeling valued and respected for your contributions is incredibly motivating. It fosters loyalty and commitment, which are essential for any successful team or organization.
Absolutely. So principle number 5 is about tailoring your communication to resonate with the other person's interests, showing that you've listened and care about what matters to them. And now we come to the final principle for this part of our deep dives. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely.
That's a powerful one. It really encapsulates the spirit of all the other principles, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
about putting the focus on the other person and making them feel valued and respected.
It really does. And as Carnegie emphasizes, it has to be sincere. People can spot fake flattery a mile away. It's got to be genuine.
Absolutely. Authenticity is key. People can sense when you're not being genuine, and it can actually backfire, making them feel manipulated or patronized.
Right. And he points out that mastering these 6 principles lays the foundation for the next part of his book, where he goes into how to win people to your way of thinking. Making someone feel truly important sets the stage for effective persuasion and influence.
It makes sense. If you've made someone feel valued and respected, they're naturally going to be more open to hearing your ideas and perspectives. It creates a foundation of trust and goodwill that makes collaboration much easier.
So, just to recap, the 6 principles we've covered are: don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Give honest and sincere appreciation. Remember that a person's name is incredibly important to them. Be a good listener and encourage others to talk about themselves. Talk in terms of the other person's interests and make them feel important sincerely.
It's an incredibly insightful framework for navigating human interactions, both in our personal and professional lives. It really boils down to shifting our focus outward, being more mindful of the people around us, and making a conscious effort to connect with them in a meaningful way.
And for you, our listener, here's a challenge. Try applying one.